John records in his gospel, a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Now, the gospel writers portray Jesus as performing many supernatural feats, such as healing the blind, turning water into wine, raising Lazarus from the dead, and feeding 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and some fish. But can it be said that Jesus actually performed the miracles recorded about him?
It's one of the remarkable gains of contemporary history on Jesus that a majority of current Jesus scholars, including many who are not Christian believers, agree that Jesus did do remarkable healings, and that is the main explanation for why he attracted crowds and drew so many followers. It wasn't just that his teaching was exciting, though it was. They came because things were happening. You know, a great aunt who had been sick for 50 years, bring her and Jesus will heal her. You know, that draws the crowds and would do today if it happened here in Westminster.
Most scholars, the vast majority today, would say that Jesus did at least the healing miracles and the exorcisms. The miracles of Jesus are attested in all the gospel strata.
I do think Jesus was a miracle worker, along with several other miracle workers we have both in Jewish sources and in pagan sources. Would his miracle working have been attributed to God? Certainly by some, but as we even see in the Gospels, others would have said, oh yes, we agree he did miracles, but he does them by the power of Satan. The miracle working itself is unquestioned.
I can remember as a university student, the idea of any kind of a miracle story was poo-pooed, it was laughed at. That's changed in 30 years. You can see it in popular culture. You can see it in the popular television program Star Trek. Mr. Spock wants to be a machine, right? He wants to be scientific. Science can solve everything. In the new series, the new version of it, you've got a machine who wants to be a human. You've got characters who want to be in touch with the inner spirit and channel and do all kinds of strange things. That show reflects the change that's taken place. In science, there's a recognition, hey, we don't have a closed universe anymore. We have to be open. We're not real sure about our origins anymore. Maybe there is something beyond the physical universe. Maybe there is a God. Maybe miracles do occur.
Still, there are some scholars and historians who refuse to admit Jesus performed miracles.
Members, for example, of the Jesus Seminar, who are skeptical in their approach to the New Testament, have made many of their presuppositions abundantly clear. They've listed them, for example, in the introduction to their edition of the so-called five Gospels. And according to the fellows of that seminar, the number one pillar of scholarly investigation of the historical Jesus is the presupposition of naturalism. That is to say, that miracles do not happen. But it's important to see that that conclusion is not based on the evidence, it's built into the presupposition. If you come to the Gospels with the presupposition of naturalism, then of course what you wind up with will be a purely human Jesus. So the issue there isn't one of evidence, the issue there is one of presuppositions. What is the justification for this presupposition of naturalism?
What needs to be noted is that the historical evidence itself indicates the naturalistic assumption that miracles never happen is not true. What is this evidence? It's the fact that secular writers in history describe Jesus as a miracle worker. These writers had no philosophical axe to grind. So unless Jesus was actually known to them through their sources as a miracle worker, they had no reason for describing him as such. Examples of this are Josephus in his Jewish Antiquities, the Jewish rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud, who all cite Jesus as a miracle worker.
Now, what's interesting to me is that it's not just the New Testament that claims that Jesus was a miracle worker. Later Jewish traditions, who rejected that Jesus was the Messiah, also attest that Jesus did miracles. It is also true that some of the later Greco-Roman sources as well also attest that Jesus was a miracle worker. And then, of course, we have the famous testimony of Josephus to the same effect. Do we have credible testimonies that Jesus did miracles? I think we do have some of those.
If you come to the text and you believe miracles can't happen, you've kind of got a dilemma on your hands.
you read these texts about Jesus multiplying the loaves, or you read these texts about Jesus healing the blind, and you've got to come up with some kind of explanation of what goes on. In fact, the healing of the blind one is an interesting one, because in the Old Testament, blind people didn't get healed. No one did that miracle. And that's not one you can very easily fake.
It would be bad methodology to simply dismiss these in advance before even looking at the evidence that they might have actually occurred. Otherwise, we could be ruling out the true hypothesis simply on the basis of a philosophical presupposition for which we have no justification.
Now consider this about miracles. Facts from psychiatry, medicine, and science are supplying evidence which may indicate miracles are happening in our world today.
I think a seventh tie-in in favor of the miracles in the New Testament is that there's some very hard data, I think, that are difficult to explain away. I think of Marcus Borg, who reports in one of his books on Jesus that there was a team of psychiatrists recently who could not explain a couple of possession cases by normal scientific means. I also referred to a double-blind experiment with almost 400 heart patients in San Francisco, where they were monitored in 26 categories, and those who were prayed for were statistically better in 21 out of 26 categories. And because the experiment was performed well, this was published in a secular journal, the Southern Journal of Medicine. So if you can see some things today, maybe you can't say, oh yeah, there's a miracle right there, but if it makes you wonder a little bit, I have to say, can we be so quick to condemn the things Jesus did in the first century?
Science is also providing evidence that points to the existence of God. And if the scientific evidence points to the existence of God, then we must be open to the possibility miracles can happen.
And it's interesting to note that in modern science, for example, in physics, scientists are quite willing to talk about realities which are quite literally metaphysical in nature.
Many scientists now believe that the evidence for the Big Bang Theory points to a simultaneous beginning for all matter, energy, and even the space-time dimensions of the universe. This evidence has led them to place the cause of the universe outside. That is, independent of matter, energy, space, and time. This evidence calls for the strong possibility of the existence of God.
If there is a creator and designer of the universe who has brought it into being, then if such a being exists, clearly he could intervene in the course of history and perform miraculous acts. And so in the absence of some sort of a proof of atheism, it seems to me that we have to be open to the possibility of miracles. To give an analogy, in the field of cosmology, the evidence indicates that the universe came into existence in a great explosion called the Big Bang at some point in the finite past. And many physicists are quite willing to say that that event requires the existence of a transcendent creator and designer of the universe who brought it into being. Now, when we come to the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, could it be that just this being has intervened in history in a dramatic and miraculous way, as Jesus claimed? Shouldn't we be at least open to investigating those claims?
Now, since there is multiply attested historical evidence in the Gospels that Jesus performed miracles, and since there is evidence from non-Christian secular sources that Jesus was a miracle worker, and since psychiatry, medicine, and science are now reporting data that are signposts of something beyond what we know, is anyone justified in ruling out the miraculous before investigating the evidence?
Perhaps these miracles in the life of Jesus are, as it were, signposts of transcendence to something beyond the universe, something greater, breaking in a dramatic way in the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. And it seems to me that as open-minded people, we simply cannot exclude this in advance without looking at the evidence.
So assuming that there is good historical evidence that Jesus did perform miracles, what do they say about who he is? More importantly, what did Jesus think about himself? Did he ever claim to be God? We'll turn to that next.
Coming up next, did Jesus claim to be the Son of God?
He claimed that he could sit at the right hand of the Father. That's not any person. who gets to go directly into God's presence and, if you will, park there. You've got to have a lot of authority and a lot of nerve to think that you can sit next to God.
Also, was Jesus the long-awaited Messiah, or was he merely a political figure? We'll explore these questions and more when we return.